Hello, everyone, and welcome to TDWI's webinar program. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Linda Briggs. I'm an editor here at TDWI, and I'll be your moderator. Our program today is Modern Data Analytics in the Cloud, Achieving an End-to-End Strategy. It's sponsored by Snowflake. And for our presentation today, we'll hear briefly from Dave Stodder with TDWI, and then Dave is going to lead a discussion with our three panelists who are joining him today. Daniel Mintz with Looker, Dave Lipowitz with Matillion, and Clark Patterson with Snowflake. Before I turn the stage over to Dave to get us started, just a few background items for the audience. First of all, today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of the presentation and the panel discussion, the speakers are going to open things up for a question and answer period with the audience. So if at any time during the discussion you have a question for anyone on the panel or for Dave, go ahead and type it in there on your console and send it over. We'll answer as many of those as we can. Toward the end of the hour, we may grab a question or two during the panel discussion as well. So please, we welcome your participation. If you run into any technical issues during the webinar, there's a help area on your console. You can click on that. If you're a Twitter user, we certainly welcome you tweeting about the event during it or afterward. Please include the hashtag TDWI in your tweets. Finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, there is a line for that on your console. You can download a PDF immediately. Also, as always, we're recording today's webinar, and we'll be emailing each of you a link to the archive. You can view that again later, or we certainly encourage you to share that link with colleagues who may not have been able to make it today. Okay, once again, today's program is Modern Data Analytics in the Cloud, Achieving an End-to-End Strategy. Our first speaker today is David Stodder. David is Senior Research Director for Business Intelligence here at TDWI. As an analyst, writer, and researcher, David has provided thought leadership on key topics in BI, analytics, IT, and information management for over 2 decades. Previously, he headed up his own independent firm and served as VP and Research Director with Ventana Research. Dave was the founding chief editor of Intelligent Enterprise, a major publication and media site dedicated to the BI and data warehousing communities. With TDWI, Dave focuses on providing research-based insights and best practices for organizations implementing BI, analytics, performance management, and related technologies and methods. So Dave, always good to have you here. Let me turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Linda, and it's great to be here. And thank you to everyone who's joining us today out in the audience, and also thank you in advance to our panelists from Snowflake, Matillion, and Looker. So I think we've got a good discussion today talking about certainly 2 topics colliding, as I'll be talking about, that are very top of mind in organizations as to how they can improve analytics and make better use of the cloud and how it's all coming together. So not to get ahead of myself too much, let me give my agenda out here and what the agenda is for the webinar. We'll be talking, I'll offer an introductory discussion just about some trends and directions toward this idea of an end-to-end strategy that we're going to be talking about today. And then we'll get into our panel discussion. So that's going to be the meat of the webinar today. So first we'll talk about user perspectives, taking it from the user perspective on analytics and data management in the cloud, talk about cloud data strategies themselves, talk about some of the data preparation, data transformation, data integration kind of issues, and then close up with some discussion about governance and security, since we do see that in our research as top of mind for moving into the cloud. And then we do have a poll question. We're going to have an audience Q&A at the end, as Linda said. So we'll have plenty of opportunities, I hope, to entertain your questions, and so be thinking about that as we go through our presentation and begin our discussion. Okay, well, thinking about trends, cloud and analytics. I love history, so it's nice to think about history. And certainly we're in an era where 2 big trends are coming together, rising together at the same time, and that is the cloud and analytics. And so from the side of the cloud, we've got a very rapid growth and evolution through kind of the classic types of cloud, I guess you could say, software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And so all of these are still alive and well. Software as a service, of course, very familiar to anyone who's used any kind of apps. The software licensing, subscription-based is usually it's centrally hosted, not on your systems, but off into through the wire. And then platform as a service certainly has grown considerably with cloud computing services that are out there and cloud platforms. And so that's, very important, really central to what we're going to be talking about here. And then, of course, there is still infrastructure as a service, which is being used heavily, often usually accessed through or connected through APIs, lots of kind of virtualization services out there from different vendors to enable organizations to just have their infrastructure and then build on top of that. Data gravity is increasing, and here I just cited a Cisco survey talking about 1.1 zettabytes in storage capacity that'll hit soon. I guess I didn't write down the year there, but I believe it was actually 2020, so we're talking about next year. And so what that really means, and is I think that's a big influence on the move to the cloud, is how much data is being generated in these kinds of services. And so rather than moving the data into on-premises systems, of course that is happening, but in many cases it's easier to just work with it in the cloud, reduce some movement steps there, and, well, some other reasons that we'll discuss as we go along. So that's the cloud, and then on the other side, of course, is analytics. I mean, analytics have been rising for a long time, but it's really taken off as organizations really want to become data-driven. They want to do things like look at the customer data better, do market basket analysis, segmenting customers, understand why customers might be churning. Really predictive analytics, we see that at TDWI as always now, number one in terms of what organizations want to do with analytics, want to get better predictive insights. And so they want to do it quickly, and rather than build out systems on premises, they're looking at the cloud as a place to locate that data and be able to run their analytics. And then as we, of course, moving into AI and machine learning, trying to run those kinds of algorithms and AI models and things like that, more sophisticated stuff. So what's happening, of course, is it's some of it is resident in the cloud, some of it's coming from on-premises and expanding into the cloud, using the cloud as sort of like the way to expand those systems quickly or do it dynamically, and then, of course, using data that's originating both in cloud data warehouses and data lakes. So what are the key attractions? I mean, this is probably pretty familiar to everyone, but, we've got some research that does back it up, that scalability, over half in our the TDWI community saying that is the number one reason why they want to go to the cloud. Flexibility is close. It's about 41% in our more recent survey. And and then the third would be cost. So the scalability, flexibility, cost are kind of at the top. The idea that you can pay for what you need, be flexible. You have a business objective that's coming up very soon. You need to address it. Certainly can expand, that kind of thing. Data gravity, as I mentioned before, that's another key attraction. I think I've already kind of hit all these points, but let's see. Yep, pretty much. So, data gravity, more data in the cloud. And then the third reason is really state of the art, that organizations kind of struggle to update their technology on premises to improve, programming, use of programming languages and using frameworks, because there's just so much innovation that's happening very quickly, particularly in the open source area. And that's another thing, the side thought is we see open source is probably the third thing that's really rising at the same time as cloud and analytics. So it's often a chance for organizations to use open source technologies, newer technologies, try them out, maybe set up systems in the cloud that they can see how these things work, and then for the developers to use different languages and different development frameworks and so forth. So that's the thing there, is the state of the art. People can choose services that implement the latest technologies, a place to begin to look at use of AI and machine learning, test those out for smarter technologies, maybe embedded in applications and services. And then, of course, avoid having to maintain the older systems, because most organizations have enough of that already and are looking for ways to not add to it too much. So just to look at, again, some of our research here in terms of trends in the cloud. So on the top corner, it's not a huge sample size, but it was taken from our Las Vegas conference, so it's really the part of the TDWI community. And just seeing here that, basically within the next 12 months, everyone's really expecting a lot more of their organization's BI, AI, advanced, and analytics workloads to be in the cloud. And then on the bottom left, you can see what infrastructure do you have planned for predictive analytics. And here, this is a survey by my colleague Fern Halper, and she found that you can see the highest plan to have percentages are all in the cloud. So data warehouse, data marts in the public cloud. You see about 28% have now, but 37% plan to have. And then down here we can see that analytics platform on the public cloud and data lake on public cloud, also pretty high growth percentages anticipated there. So that's interesting to see. So we can see where the community is going with this. Okay, so I think another big trend to be thinking about is democratization. And here, again, probably familiar stuff for everyone. Self-service has been huge, particularly in the area of visual data discovery and making it easier for users to look at different kinds of data, and particularly non-technical users, as it gets easier and easier to use, more visual. And this is also enabling kind of a class of users that we've been talking about the last few years, citizen data scientists, basically starting from maybe business users or business analysts who are not considered technical in terms of being able to develop or knowledge of the data, but want to do more diverse analytics, want to begin to develop predictive models, productionalize them, operationalize them. And so they need the technology, the solutions to be able to do that. And so we're seeing that as a self-service call as well, as the kind of stuff that used to be really just for the experienced and advanced data scientists now being available for those who are less technical. So supporting all this has got to be cloud data preparation, transformation, and the data management aid, and it's got to be able to fit these kinds of needs. And so this is, again, an area of sort of accelerated progress and solutions in the industry. Where self-service is going to go on top of all this is augmented intelligence, and we're starting to see that already in the solutions that are embedding AI, using machine learning behind the scenes to provide that kind of data smarts and being able to provide recommendations of different data sets to look at or different steps that ought to be taken, and then also providing automated predictive insights too, as machine learning can kind of crawl through the data faster or crunch through the data faster than humans can, particularly as it gets into big and diverse data, and just provide those kinds of insights within the tool and within the visual kind of interface. So self-service, it's not over yet. I mean, it's going to get easier, and then augmented intelligence, I think, is going to change it even more. So it's more of like a partner in discovery and analytics. So cloud computing complexities, I mean, there's lots of choices out there. I mentioned the three platform kind of choices, but there's also public, private, and then hybrid or both. So some choices that organizations have to make there. Certainly public cloud has grown considerably, pay-as-you-go, per-usage kind of model, very well understood. Private cloud, this is where things start to get harder to define really, because sometimes they can be hosted on premises or in your environment, may have aspects of them that are kind of resemble public cloud, but often with better security and more control by the user organization. And then both is typical, where we see public and private cloud. And then the issue is, how do we integrate these? How do we provide access across these, no matter where the data is? And then the other thing that's making cloud complex, of course, is that there's multi-cloud. Most organizations are using not just Amazon, not just Azure, Microsoft Azure, not just Google or maybe other providers, but using something of all three of them, in part to avoid vendor lock-in, but then they have to face issues. Are we sort of duplicating and triplicating our costs here? Does complexity rise? And so some issues to be sorted out there. Again, looking at some of our research in terms of strategies for replacement, we could spend a lot of time in this chart, but I'll just note quickly that you can see here at the top, the number one for augmenting or replacing existing BI analytics and data warehousing is cloud-native BI platforms. So there again, you can see how top of mind cloud is, and then we can see cloud-based data lake, 31% planning to augment or replace their existing systems with this, and then 21% are cloud-native data warehouse. So all three of these are pretty healthy percentages, and I'm sure as we go through, and we can see new analytics platform, which could well even be cloud systems as number two there. So a lot of activity in terms of cloud, and then we can see that on-premises data warehouses are only 13% are planning to augment or replace with another data warehousing system. So there's cloud is, I think, certainly rising as organizations think about where to go next with their BI and analytics and data warehousing systems. So, as I mentioned before, not to be forgotten all of this, the hard part is often in the data preparation transformation area. So organizations really need to be thinking about this. And we do see in our research that it's an area where organizations do have trouble and where there are lots of delays and latencies. We can see, not just our research, but I think other analyst firms across the industry see that users, analysts, and data scientists are spending too much time on data preparation and transformation. There's a strong desire to reduce the amount of time so they can increase time to value. They want to increase self-service to enable users to do more on their own, be less dependent on IT. Of course, some of the issues there that have to be dealt with is whether that increases data silos and all that. And we'll be discussing that as we go along. The objective there particularly is the Agile influence, Agile method use, trying to be more iterative and kind of provide business benefit along the way instead of waiting all the way to the end. And that's extending into the thought process about data preparation as well, not having to wait till the end of transformation processes, for example, and be able to kind of look at the data, see how it's going, see if this is what you really wanted, rather than having to wait to the end and maybe redo it. Then the final point there, very important, is integration with data catalogs and metadata management as being very important to knitting these things together to make preparation and transformation more efficient, being able to make sure they're easily accessing all the data across different systems. So the final issue is, and of course, is often not final these days, and in our regulatory period is, can you govern it? So we see here in our research that, not surprisingly, that data warehouses on premises are the easiest for organizations to govern, that they feel confident they can govern, and then the cloud systems are less confident. And I think it's a maturity issue here that organizations are don't have as much experience in the cloud. They need to improve their confidence about that. But that's some of the things we can discuss in our panel discussion today is how organizations can improve their confidence. Frankly, we've heard anecdotally from some organizations that they're actually more confident, certainly in their security with systems in the cloud than they are on premises. Because it's better documented and they're working with vendors that they feel they can trust. But in any case, we still see in our research that certainly both these issues, security and governance, rise to the top in terms of concerns. And so I think that where we're headed with all this is organizations really, taking off for the title of our webinar is to develop an end-to-end strategy. So they want modern data analytics in the cloud, want to be able to put all these systems together, make sure that the front ends that are being developed and supported in the cloud work well with the back-end data management systems, data warehouses, data lakes. They want to make sure that their data preparation transformation systems that are often a source of latency in organizations move to the cloud or can be adapted to this kind of cloud use. And they need to make sure that there's governance end-to-end as well, that throughout that there aren't holes where governance is falling down or where security is falling down. So among the challenges that happen, avoiding too many silos. They don't want cloud to yet become more silos, reducing the latency and eliminating bottlenecks because the organization wants broadly to be able to moving towards those kind of goals, and also managing the learning curve to make sure that it's making it more difficult for users, analysts, data scientists, and so forth to come up to speed on the new technologies. Okay, well with that, Linda, I'm going to hand it back to you to introduce our panelists.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And as I do that, I want to remind the audience that we welcome your questions. So this is a great time to get questions answered by a panel of experts around this topic. So send them in, type them in there on your console, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So joining us today on our panel, we have Clark Patterson, who is Head of Product Marketing for Snowflake's core data warehouse product. He's an industry veteran with experience leading teams at Confluent, Cloudera, and Informatica. And from Matillion, we have Dave Lipowitz, who is a solutions architect with 20 years of engineering experience and IT experience. Over his career, Dave has focused on creating organizational success through the judicious use of database technology, developing a deep understanding of software development, database architecture, and agile methodologies. And finally, from Looker, please welcome Daniel Mintz, who is Chief Data Evangelist at Looker. Previously, Daniel was head of data and analytics at the fast-growing media startup Upworthy. Before that, he was director of analytics at political powerhouse MoveOn.org. So welcome to all of you, and Dave, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Linda. And, well, thanks to all our panelists, Clark, David, Daniel, welcome.
Thanks, David.
Let's see.
Yeah, thank you.
I think great to have you here. I think we're going to have a good discussion today. Now, Linda did introduce all of you guys with your bios, but I just thought it might be good to let each of you maybe speak for maybe a minute or two to just give a introduction to yourself and the company, and maybe just a quick idea of your perspective on this end-to-end topic before we dive into our sort of set questions. So, Clark, I don't know if you want to just start off there.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for the introduction there. So Snowflake, for folks that are not familiar with us, is a cloud data warehouse. So it's a SQL database built specifically and architected specifically for the cloud, for the purpose of cloud analytics. So homegrown with the cloud in mind. And really our goal is to really help address a lot of the issues that David covered in the intro content here. So, how do we deal with siloed and diverse data sets, manage scale and speed issues, get around this issue of complex and costly infrastructure, which a lot of people are definitely trying to deal with these days. And then, of course, the kind of the performance side is in the moment decision making. And so, we've got a focus on effectively kind of separating compute and storage in our solution, which makes it very, very easy for folks to kind of scale up and out their deployments of a very diverse set of data in our platform, and really get to a point where they can address all those issues, right? So very easy to spin up and down instances of databases in our platform. So a lot of our customers use us kind of as that single source of truth, and then as needed across the organization, they can share the wide range of data that sits in our platform. So lots of different workloads, everything from data lakes to just straight up data warehouse modernization, where people are moving from on-premises to the cloud. We get some data science type of workloads that sit on us. And it's all done in a kind of pay-as-you-go type of environment where the compute as needed can be spun up kind of in a T-shirt size approach as needed, and just cost effectively build a great data analytics solution.
Great, thank you very much, Clark. David, why don't we hear from you about a little more detail about Matillion and what your perspective is.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate the introduction and the time to speak with everyone today. As Linda said, I've been in the data and database space for about 20 years. I spent a long time as a database performance tuning specialist and a database administrator, and I kept running into customers that had problems that they wanted to solve with a traditional relational database on premises, and that technology simply couldn't scale to internet data volumes. So I started looking out into other solutions and found cloud data warehouses to really fit well for those sorts of problems. And now I work for Matillion, which helps customers implement those sorts of solutions. Matillion, quite simply, is data transformation for cloud data warehouses. We provide a cloud-native solution for getting data both into those cloud data warehouses as well as transforming the data once it's there. So our technology is very simple to use. It's a GUI-based product, and which offers you a very fast time to value as far as getting the value out of cloud data warehouses like Snowflake. We leverage the scalability of Snowflake to do the heavy lifting. So it is a very cost-effective solution. As a cloud-native solution, it is pay-as-you-go. So yeah, that's really the idea behind Matillion and what we do. We fundamentally, we just don't believe it's enough to accumulate data in these cloud data warehouses. You need to transform that data for it to have value and to inform a data-driven decision-making process. So my job now is to help customers succeed in doing that. And yeah, that's my role as a solution architect.
Okay, excellent. Great, David. Thank you. Daniel, let's hear about Looker a bit, and then we'll go with our questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So Looker is a data analytics platform. This is actually a really nice panel because we have Matillion, who sort of moves your data, Snowflake, who holds your data and makes it really easy to query, and then Looker, which sits on top of Snowflake. So, Looker is a tool that gives everybody in your business access to the data that you've put in your cloud data warehouses, but make sure that they all stay on the same page, that the data that they're looking at is giving them consistent answers about what the data means to the business, what the business metrics are, really fighting that sort of endless battle between, democratization of data and sort of consistency and standards. And, Looker, it was architected specifically for the cloud, founded in 2012, right around the same time as Snowflake, and took an approach that, before then really wasn't possible, which was to leave the data where it lives in your, increasingly powerful data warehouse, data lake, database, data store, and use all of the power of those tools to query that data and get answers for people directly. And so that means you're always getting the freshest data. It means that our modeling layer, our sort of virtual semantic layer that sits on top, where the analysts in your organization can put all of their knowledge about what the data means, that semantic layer ensures that when I ask for lifetime customer value, and Clark asks for lifetime customer value, and David asks for lifetime customer value, none of us actually need to know the current precise definition of that business metric, because one of our analysts has put that definition in Looker. And so all we have to know is that's the business metric we want. Looker writes the appropriate SQL, sends it off to a cloud data warehouse like Snowflake, brings back the answer, lets you, ask further questions, visualize that, or send it on to, literally thousands of other web tools that you might be using in your day-to-day.
Cool, that's great. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, Daniel. And actually, let's okay, great. Well, thanks to all three of you, and let's go to our first question. And Daniel, I may actually go to you first to provide some thought on this topic, because we're going to look at it kind of first from the user experience. And so the question about how do organizations satisfy growing user demand for highly interactive visual analytics and business intelligence? And I'm sure all three of you guys have perspectives on this. But Daniel, what do you see as some of the key issues there?
Yeah, I think this is something that we see as a key driver of our growth. When I look across the people who are working in a modern enterprise, many of them are data workers. Most of them are data workers. They are fundamentally sitting in front of a computer, putting data into a system, whether that's Salesforce or Marketo or Google Analytics or an email service provider or Gainsight or Zendesk, whatever tool they're using, they are fundamentally sitting there putting data into a system. And the question is, are they going to be able to ask questions of that data and get answers back? And too often we see that they can't. And sometimes that's because the data is locked away. Things are sort of locked down too tightly, and so they have to wait in what we call data breadlines, where they have to wait for IT to give them the data that they asked for, right? Because they're not allowed to have access. And sometimes they do have access, but the data that they're getting access to is pretty raw. And so it's on them to figure out what that data means, to transform that data, to make sense of that data, often in everyone's favorite BI tool, Microsoft Excel, but often in other more powerful BI tools. And the problem with that is it seems great because, hey, I've got data democracy, everybody can access data, I can slice and dice, I can figure out what this data means to my department, until I get into a room with people from other departments. And they have other data sets that they extracted at other times and put other calculations on top of. And now we spend the whole meeting trying to figure out whose data is right and accurately represents what's going on. So, that's really fundamental to our approach, is saying people are demanding more and more access to data, and there's more and more supply of data than there's ever been before. And we need to bridge that gap. We need to give them the interactive visual analytics which sometimes looks like business intelligence and sometimes doesn't. Sometimes it looks like Google Analytics. Sometimes it looks like Salesforce. It needs to meet them where they're at, but it needs to be consistent. It can't just be on them to figure out what the data means.
Yeah, I think the consistency is a really good point there, because I think that often does stall organizations. It's very easy to kind of see it in a dashboard, but if it isn't consistent, they're not going to trust it, and nor should they really. Well, thinking about the consistency, David, maybe I'll bring you in on this with your discussion about transforming data, and how does that mix in with the trying to get consistency, and what are some of the issues around data transformation and making the user experience work?
Yeah, that's a great topic. My least favorite meeting on earth is the how come this number doesn't match that number discussion. And transformation can really help you avoid those conversations by letting everybody work from the same set of business rules. And so it's very important to have reusable transformations that can synthesize that data into an analytics-ready format, so that everybody is working from the same page. So it's important to have a tool that consistently does that, and does that in a repeatable and easily reusable way. From my perspective, just being able to do that, as well as do that on internet scales of data volumes, is really important, and that's where the cloud data warehouse comes in. You want, in my opinion, to have a platform that's capable of doing those transformations very quickly and scalably as you add in more and more data sources. So in this age of third-party SaaS providers, people are pulling data from so many disparate services. Getting those into a unified place is important. So to speak to that consistency issue, and then running those same transformations against those different raw data sources and manipulating them into an analytics-ready shape relies very heavily on a cloud data warehouse that can grow with those kinds of volumes.
Good. Well, Clark, I think that kind of teed it up to you to provide some insights about that kind of scale issues. Your organizations have more users, they have growing demands. I mean, how do you satisfy that? Looking at from the perspective of the cloud data warehouse.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it for us is just kind of simplifying how you can make all this happen. And there's a couple of things that I mean when I say simplification. One is just how do you get people into the cloud data warehouse? And if you can get to a point where you've got the right mix of kind of performance, concurrency, and everything else that's important with regards to getting your hands around data on a kind of individual to individual basis, or perhaps department to department basis. If you can do that in a very, very simple manner, it makes it really easy to have that customized experience for anybody that's looking to get their arms around information. And so we really kind of aim to segment out how compute in particular gets dispositioned, so that if there's like an urgent need, we can assign kind of high horsepower compute to it, or if it's something that can kind of take some time, we can lower it down. So making that whole process very, very simple and straightforward takes a lot of the wait time out that we're accustomed to for change. If we want to add columns to tables, we all know that it takes ages typically, right? If we can kind of get into this kind of simplification and being able to spin things up and down really easy in the cloud, it makes it simple to make changes like that in a way that we couldn't do before. The other kind of interesting point of kind of simplification is